Shehan Jeyarajah joins us from CBS Sports. So much going on. Hey, man, what's up? Good-looking jacket. Look like a football coach at Media Day, by the way. Good to have you on. Last week of the regular season, still chaos in many ways, and we'll get to that. But your thoughts about North Carolina and moving on from Mack Brown?
Yeah, Mack Brown never quite makes it easy, does it? Obviously, this has a lot of comparisons to his exit at Texas as well. And look, I get it. I mean, Mack Brown loves coaching football. He loves working with players. He loves developing teams. But, I looked at the numbers last week. He's the only coach in the FBS older than 70 years old. He's actually one of two who are sitting head coaches older than 65 years old. So I get it. North Carolina kind of decided now was the time to go in a different direction. And the thing is, too, about North Carolina is that they get the opportunity in this cycle to probably be the best job available. So they're going to have their first pick of any candidate that they want in this cycle. And I think that, honestly, for North Carolina, it might have been too good to pass up.
For their next coach, where do you see them, what pools do you see them fishing in?
Well, it's such an interesting question because we don't really have a good idea of how this new coaching carousel is going to look post House v NCAA and also post expanded college football playoff. I think of, let's think of some teams that could be in the college football playoff, right? Like, I don't think Rhett Lashley at SMU is going to be a candidate, but let's say that you're North Carolina, you wanted him. Well, he might be coaching well into December and January before we even know. Even think about it from the perspective of if you want to hire a coordinator from one of these teams that's in the college football playoff. I think it's going to make the timeline really interesting. Now, I don't necessarily think that they have to go that far. I think that there are some options for them on the table. The number one option that comes to mind for me is John Sumrall, the head coach at Tulane. Now, Tulane also might be in the college football playoff. They're going to be right on that line, but I think that he would be a fantastic fit. He's coached in the South for most of his career. He's a former Kentucky linebacker, led Troy to 2 conference championships as well. I think he'd be an immediate fit. Jamie Chadwell over at Liberty would be another name that I think that people would want to keep an eye on. He's had tons of success, first at Charleston Southern and FCS, up to Coastal Carolina, and now at Liberty. But really, I think they're going to have a wide net to really look for their next choice. And the big thing is I think they're just probably not going to hire as old as they've had.
Shehan, we were talking about this a few minutes ago. Chris Kleiman had some comments about the Big 12 and the fact that the conference needs to get together this offseason and discuss their scheduling and discuss ways that they can, better position their teams to try and get postseason success. For example, the SEC or the ACC play a less conference game, right? And maybe they do something like that. Does anything come to mind for you? And do you think there's anything the Big 12 can theoretically do, come up with in off-season meetings that could better their chances outside of their teams just winning more on the field?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a really interesting question, right? Because with a 16-team league, from my perspective, I think it would be a mistake to have less conference games, to get to play each other less times. I think that something that maybe is worth thinking about is trying to find ways to normalize the schedules a little bit. Something that's been proposed is pod scheduling, where maybe you have sort of consistent 3 teams that you work with and maybe different pods play each other. And that way you kind of just get a little bit more of a distribution of teams. One of the biggest things, and I think to the ACC specifically in this case, which obviously has 17 teams, you've got Miami, SMU, and Clemson fighting for the end of the year, and none of them have played each other. I actually think that that's a flaw in the system in many ways and not necessarily a benefit. The other piece, too, though, is I think that you look at this Big 12 and this year, part of it is that there just isn't a team or two that clearly was able to make it through an entire slate. I look back a couple years ago, and it's not just Oklahoma, who obviously has had some really good teams, but TCU made it through undefeated. We've seen multiple teams play schedules like what the Big 12 teams have had this year and go 8-1 and have a chance to be there at the very end. I think that at least with this 2024 season, for a variety of reasons, it's just been a period of change in the Big 12, whether it's quarterbacks turning over, head coaches turning over, obviously a bunch of new teams coming in. I don't necessarily know that means that there's an existential issue with the way that the schedules are structured, but obviously we'll have the 2025 season as well to try to figure that out.
Shehan, when you look at the Big 12, with now what we know with one game left, and BYU and obviously Arizona State, Iowa State are the ones who, those last two are the ones in the driver's seat. Can any of those 3 be the 4th seed among the automatic qualifiers ahead of Boise State?
Yeah, I think that whoever comes out of the Big 12, if it's one of those currently 2-loss teams, I think they'll be okay to be the 4 seed. I mean, again, we'll learn more about these teams during the rankings tonight. But if you look at the AP poll, all of them are in the top 25 right now. A lot of them are in the top 20. And in order to make the Big 12 title game and win the Big 12, they'll probably have to play another top 20 team and get another win in order to do that. So I feel like they should be okay. Now, Arizona State is the team that I absolutely think will be the best positioned of the bunch after going and beating BYU last week. I expect them to firmly be in the top 15. Iowa State, probably in the top 20. But, look, it's going to be pretty close as well. I mean, Boise State is playing really well. I'm fascinated to see where exactly they end up. But I do think that when the totality of the resumes come together and you have that conference championship game, I do think ultimately that the Big 12 will manage to get that 4 seed.
A&M and Texas play this week. There's a very real scenario where A&M could make it to the conference title game and get a 4th loss. Do you think that Greg Sankey will have to back off his getting there is reward enough thing if A&M has a 4th loss after that?
Well, I think that the issue won't necessarily be that a 3-loss A&M will be kicked out, because I don't think that a 3-loss A&M, even before that 4th loss, would make it into the field, especially with their relative lack of wins. I mean, you look, their 2 big wins were against LSU and Missouri, 2 teams who might not be ranked whenever we have the CFP rankings tonight. So I think that it's more about what their resume would be prior than necessarily what would happen in that game. I think the bigger issue, and this is something as well with the Big 12, certainly when you look at with the Big 10 and the ACC as well, I don't think that these conferences have a very good way to create conference championship games that make sense. Because look at the SEC just specifically. I mean, if Texas A&M wins that game, they're probably next week going to head into the rankings as like the 5th ranked SEC team in the CFP rankings, but they'll be in the number 2 spot playing for, of course, an SEC championship. I don't think that them losing that game and getting knocked out is an indictment of conference championship games. I think it's an indictment of the SEC not having a good way to put their 2 best teams in the conference championship. Now, look, with 8 conference games, and you mentioned it, I mean, the Big 12 plays 9 and the Big 10 plays 9. I think that you're going to see this very often. You're going to see a lot of years where you have 5, 6, 7, 6-2 teams who are maybe of similar quality, and you just don't know who's going to come out of it. So I think that ultimately this is a problem with the SEC's creation of a conference championship, and not necessarily the fact that a conference championship game exists.
What do you think is the risk for Texas if they lose this game? Do they fall out of the playoff? Where do you kind of see them get positioned as a result if that were to happen?
Well, I don't think they will, but it's largely because we've seen so much movement on the back end of the SEC. If we don't see Ole Miss and Alabama and even Texas A&M lose a 3rd game, I think that Texas would be at much more risk of getting left out. I mean, they'd have essentially no good wins heading into the field, and of course they would have multiple losses at that point against the 2 quality opponents they would have faced on their schedule. Now, with the 10-2 Texas, that obviously rates really well in some of these advanced stats, and you look at just their overall performance has been really good. I think that they'll still be in, but I also do think if they lose this game to Texas A&M, you're looking at their resume as the College Football Playoff Committee and saying, I don't necessarily know how it compares to some of these top teams. I think they'd be, maybe a 10 or an 11 seed. I think they'd be treated more like Indiana than they necessarily would even like Penn State or Ohio State. So I do think they'd make the field, but it wouldn't look pretty for them.
So in terms of this rivalry being back after all of these years, I don't know where you were in 2011. I know you were very young, younger than me for sure. But my gosh, Shehan, this has been a really long time coming, man. Just what are your thoughts on this rivalry being back, the excitement that it's built up with both of them being pretty good, and just, having this back in the state of Texas as much as anything else?
Well, that was my senior year of high school, so I jumped over to Baylor and met you guys a year after that. But this for us, I mean, my family was not a college football family, but my mom grew up in Austin. She went to UT for a couple of years, and I had some other family that went to UT who still lived in Austin. So this was the game that we always had on, even as people who didn't care about college football. And I'll say I'm working on a story right now for CBSSports.com that'll be released on Thursday, and it's been really cool for me to get to go back and talk to some of the legends of this game, guys like Quan Cosby, guys like Stephen McGee. And, I think that it's just such a special game for so many reasons. I mean, it is in so many ways like a state championship game of the state of Texas. And whether or not you actually went to these schools, and I mean, that obviously I didn't. I went to Baylor, but like, you kind of have your pull one way or another. You kind of have Texas is obviously the metro cosmopolitan school. Texas A&M, it's much more the rural blue collar type school. And I think that when you're growing up in the state like I did in the DFW Metroplex, like you get pulled to a side. And I think that this game coming back is so good for the sport, so good for college football. It's how college football should be. I don't love conference realignment. This is like the one benefit of it is that we get this game back, along with BYU Utah also, by the way. But I do think that that ultimately, like this is going to be such a big moment. Also, the other piece of this too is that it's very rare that Texas and Texas A&M play and are both good at the same time. Like when you look at history, there's been very few years that both teams have something to play for. I think it was 1975 was the last time that both teams played with double-digit win seasons. And there's a chance that, of course, this happens this year. And what we do know for certain is it will be a play-in game to the SEC championship game and maybe an opportunity to get into the college football playoffs. So it's a huge one. It's one of the biggest that we've ever seen, and I'm very excited to have it back.
Yeah, no, they've never even been mediocre at the same time in the same league. Like, honestly, like, neither team has been, like, one team is good, one team is bad. Like, they've never been just average at the same time. Shehan, when you look around, like the teams that are going to get pushed out, like the Alabama is probably going to get pushed out now and all that, who do you think would have outside of the Big 12, would have the most leg to stand on when it comes to the CFP and being just right there on the outside looking in?
Well, with all the losses, like, I'm not going to feel all that bad for anybody who gets left out this year. I mean, the bubble is as wide open as I think we've seen in a little while. I mean, I do look at, maybe a team like Clemson actually will be really interesting. They're going to be a 2-loss potentially ACC team. I'm curious how the committee treats them if they beat South Carolina, who's kind of the hot team in media circles right now to talk about. I do also think that the way that things will work out for the Big 12, it's just going to be unfortunate for them. I mean, if BYU doesn't lose this past week, if Colorado doesn't lose before that, we're potentially looking at a Big 12 that has multiple teams that are capable of contending for the college football playoff. And really in the past, 3 weeks, a lot of those teams have fallen off, even though I think they're of the quality of playing in the college football playoff. So those would be the first ones that come to mind. I mean, look, if you're Alabama, you lost a third game against a 6-5 Oklahoma team. I don't feel bad for you. If you're Ole Miss, you lost early in the season to Kentucky. I just think that that so many of these teams have picked up extra losses. Actually, one other team that I'll throw out there as well that I'd feel a little bad for would be Army. And, look, obviously their schedule is not all that special, and they got destroyed by Notre Dame, but, there are teams that they are better than in between who they played on their schedule and Notre Dame. Notre Dame, obviously one of the best teams in the country. And if they are potentially an AAC champion at 12-1, who'd have to beat Tulane, by the way, who's a really good team, I think that would be a team that would have at least some qualm as well.
Shehan, one more thing, and we appreciate it. Your alma mater is on fire, and they're playing a team that's won games against top 25 teams, and Lance Leipold's going to join us in a couple of hours at Kansas. Your thoughts about what Dave Aranda has done to dig his career at Baylor and also this program out of a ditch?
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. I mean, obviously we heard in the preseason that Dave Aranda came to the administration and said, here are the specific things I'm going to do, and here's how they're going to work. And almost everything that he said has essentially come true. I mean, they've completely revamped the offense. They've revamped recruiting, which I think is an underrated part of all of this. There's so much energy right now around the program. One of my first signs that I felt like things might work was pulling Jake Spavital away from Cal and pulling Keenan Hall away from SMU. Those are two guys who did not have to leave the jobs that they were at, but decided to join Dave Aranda at Baylor. I think that was a huge testament to how much belief there was among people in the industry of what he had a chance to accomplish here. But when you look even just from that moment of going 2-4 and obviously losing that Colorado game on essentially a Hail Mary, like they have mentally kept it together in a way that I could not have anticipated. I've been so impressed with what they've done. I've been joking all week. I think that Baylor versus Kansas might be the battle for who the best team in the Big 12 is right now. But I do think that these are two teams who should feel really proud of what they've accomplished this season. And, again, this is a tough matchup going against Kansas with the way that they're playing. I mean, I don't think it would be a negative at all to lose this game. But I think that Baylor's going to have a chance. And I think it's going to be an extremely fun one in Waco.
Have a great weekend, man. There's some bangers coming up. Of course, A&M and Texas, one of those, and South Carolina, Clemson's a hell of a game with a lot of implications there. Shehan, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
All right, Shehan Jeyarajah with us, CBS Sports on Tuesday.